In June 1941, on the Pampa de Nazca in southern Peru, the American historian Paul Kosak watched the sun descend toward the horizon while standing beside one of the desert's immense straight lines. The setting sun appeared to align with the line near the southern winter solstice. To Kosak, the observation suggested an astonishing possibility: the desert beneath his feet might be a vast astronomical instrument, built more than 1,000 years before European ships reached the Pacific coast of South America. The idea was powerful because the landscape already looked impossible. Across an arid plateau, ancient people had cleared dark, weathered stones to expose lighter ground beneath. They produced lines that run 4 kilometers, enormous trapezoids, spirals, and figures of birds, monkeys, spiders, plants, and human-like beings. Some designs are difficult to understand from ground level. From the air, they become unmistakable. That aerial view has shaped almost every modern story about Nazca. It has encouraged the belief that the figures were made to be seen from the sky, that the builders possessed lost technology, or that the lines formed a code aimed at celestial visitors. Yet the most important archaeological evidence is not found high above the Pampa. It is found at walking height, in the trails crossing the desert, in pottery fragments, in the placement of figures beside routes, in the relationship between lines and ceremonial centers, and in the way one geoglyph sometimes passes over another. The Nazca Lines are real, ancient, and extraordinary. The mystery is also real, but it is not the mystery usually advertised. The question is not how people without aircraft could draw large figures. Archaeologists can explain that with simple surveying methods, stakes, cords, and organized labor. The deeper question is why generations of people repeatedly transformed a dry and seemingly empty landscape into a network of images and pathways. Were the lines a calendar? Were they art? Were they ritual roads connected to rain and fertility? Or does the evidence point to several answers, created by different communities at different times? To investigate that, we have to stop treating Nazca as one design with one hidden solution. We have to see it as a landscape that accumulated meaning for centuries. The landscape beneath the legend. The Nazca and Palpa geoglyphs lie on the southern coast of Peru, roughly 400 kilometers southeast of Lima. The World Heritage Property extends across a vast desert region within the Rio Grande do Nazca drainage basin. The famous animal figures occupy only a small part of it. Most of the archaeological landscape consists of straight lines, broad cleared areas, triangles, rectangles, trapezoids, radiating line centers, and routes that intersect or overlap. The desert preserved them because it is exceptionally dry. The surface is covered by stones darkened through long exposure. When those stones are moved aside, the paler soil below creates a strong contrast. The builders did not need to cut deeply into rock. They changed the surface, sometimes clearing the interior of a shape, sometimes outlining it, and often arranging removed stones along the edges. This simplicity is important. The lines appear technologically mysterious only when scale is confused with difficulty. A long straight line can be laid out by fixing sight points and extending a chord or visual. 1. Alignment. Curves can be enlarged from smaller designs by using measured intervals. Wooden stakes have been recovered in association with geoglyphs, and experimental work has shown that organized groups can create accurate large figures with basic tools in surprisingly little time. The difficult achievement was not drawing one line. It was maintaining a cultural tradition in which people returned to the Pampa again and again. The geoglyphs were created across a long sequence stretching from the later Paracas tradition into the Nazca period. Some figures on slopes near Palpa appear earlier than many of the enormous designs on the flat Pampa. Later lines cross older ones. The ground records not a single construction event, but repeated decisions about where to walk, gather, mark territory, display images, and approach sacred places. The landscape also challenges the popular claim that the figures make sense only from an airplane. Some large forms are certainly easiest to recognize from above. But elevated hills, slopes, and nearby ridges offer partial views. More importantly, a design does not have to be seen all at once to function. A cathedral procession is experienced from inside the building, not from a view above its roof. A labyrinth is meaningful to the person walking through it, even when its complete pattern is visible only on a plan. Nazca may have worked in the same way, as an environment to be entered, crossed, and performed. Who made the lines, and when? The word Nazca often creates the impression of one unified civilization with one ruler and one construction program. The archaeological picture is more complex. The tradition developed among communities of Peru's south coast, where river valleys cut through one of the driest environments on Earth. Farming depended on limited and variable water. Settlements, cemeteries, ceramics, textiles, and ceremonial architecture show that these communities possessed sophisticated artistic traditions and organized social networks long before the Inca Empire. UNESCO places the main tradition of the lines and geoglyphs broadly between about 500 BC and AD 500, while archaeological chronologies for Paracas and Nazca culture extend across a wider range. Dating individual geoglyphs is difficult because the lines themselves are made of displaced stones and exposed soil. Researchers therefore rely on associated ceramics, organic material, superimposition, nearby sites, and scientific dating of relevant contexts. At some Palpa sites, optically stimulated luminescence produced dates between approximately AD 400 and 650 for geometric lines, showing that construction continued into later phases in at least some areas. The oldest figurative tradition is strongly associated with Paracas communities, especially on hillsides, where figures could be seen from valleys below. These earlier designs often include human-like beings and animals. Later Nazca makers expanded the practice onto flatter planes and developed immense line type figures, geometric fields, and networks connected with movement across the Pampa. The transition matters because it weakens every theory that depends on a single purpose. If the geoglyph tradition changed in location, style, scale, and motif, its social role may also have changed. An early hillside figure visible from a settlement could communicate identity or supernatural power. A later trapezoid wide enough for groups to enter might serve as a ceremonial space. A narrow line crossing the Pampa could organize movement toward a gathering point. A small relief figure beside a trail could communicate something to travelers. Archaeologists also connect the geoglyph landscape with Cahuachi, a major Nazca ceremonial center near the river. Excavations have shown monumental mounds, plazas, ritual deposits, and evidence of periodic intense use, but not the dense permanent occupation expected of a conventional city. Helene Silverman argued that Cahuachi functioned as a pilgrimage center. Other researchers have emphasized 2. Political and residential elements as well, but there is broad agreement that ceremonial activity was central to the site. In that context, the Pampa was not an empty canvas outside society. It was part of a wider sacred and social world. How to draw a giant without flying? The most famous question about Nazca is also one of the easiest to answer. The builders did not need to fly, and they did not need to view a complete figure from the air while making it. They needed a design, measurements, markers, and coordination. Imagine a small drawing divided into a grid. The same grid can be enlarged on the ground using chords and stakes. Points where a line crosses the small grid are transferred to corresponding points in the larger grid. Workers then connect those points. Straight lines are even simpler. 2 stakes establish a direction. Additional markers extended across the plane. For parallel edges, the builders maintain a measured distance. For spirals and curves, chords can control radius and proportion. The physical work was straightforward. Workers removed the dark surface stones and placed them along the margins. The exposed ground became lighter. Because rain is rare and the surface is relatively stable, the contrast endured. Some designs may have been repaired or renewed, especially if people walked them repeatedly. Their survival does not require an unknown chemical process. It requires an extreme environment and limited disturbance. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated how quickly this can be done. A small team can create a large and accurate geoglyph in hours or days, depending on the design. That does not diminish the achievement. It changes the nature of it. The impressive part is not secret engineering. It is social organization and intention. Someone selected the place. Someone defined the image. People agreed to provide labor. The act of construction may itself have been ceremonial, strengthening relationships among participants. The claim that aliens were required is not simply unsupported, it prevents us from asking better questions about ancient Andean society. Nazca artists already produced highly controlled images on ceramics and textiles. The geoglyph motifs belong to the same visual world. Birds, felines, killer whales, plants, human heads, and supernatural beings appear across media. The desert figures are not foreign objects dropped into Peru. They are an extension of local artistic and religious traditions, translated from portable objects into landscape. Once the construction mystery disappears, the purpose becomes more interesting. Why enlarge familiar images until they could be encountered across a desert? Why make figures that might be understood only gradually while moving around them? The answer may lie not in who looked down, but in who walked through the calendar in the desert. Cossack's solstice observation offered an elegant solution. Maria Reich, a German-born mathematician and translator who devoted much of her life to studying and protecting the lines, developed the astronomical interpretation further. She proposed that straight lines marked celestial events and that some animal figures represented constellations or seasonal signs. Her work brought international attention to Nazca and played a major role in conservation. Astronomy is plausible in principle. Ancient Andean societies observed the sky. Solar cycles mattered too. Agriculture and ritual. Horizon points can mark solstices, and celestial knowledge was integrated into sacred 3. landscapes elsewhere in the Andes. It would be unreasonable to assume that no Nazca line ever had an astronomical association. The problem is scale and selection. When a landscape contains hundreds of long lines pointing in many directions, some will align approximately with sunrise, sunset, stars, mountains, or other prominent features. By chance. A convincing astronomical theory must do more than identify a few impressive matches. It must show that the overall pattern differs significantly from randomness and that the proposed celestial targets were culturally meaningful at the time of construction. Gerald Hawkins, known for applying computer analysis to Stonehenge, tested a sample of Nazca Line directions against astronomical events. His result did not support the idea that the system as a whole functioned as a giant observatory or calendar. Later statistical work also found no clear universal solar pattern. Clive Ruggles' analysis of radial line azimuths detected some non-random features, but not a simple calendar. Avini's wider research concluded that the majority of lines did not have astronomical orientations. This does not prove that Kossak and Reich were wrong about every line. It shows that a local alignment cannot explain the entire landscape. Some lines may have framed a solstice sunset. Some ceremonies may have occurred on important dates. Some figures may have had celestial associations now difficult to recover. But the strong claim that the Nazca Lines as a whole were an astronomical map fails to account for overlapping construction, different geoglyph types, trail associations, ritual debris, and the enormous number of orientations with no clear celestial target. The calendar theory survives because it offers one code and one solution. The archaeology points toward something less tidy and more human, a landscape used in several ways, where astronomy could be present without being the master key. If you appreciate investigations that separate strong evidence from attractive speculation, subscribe after this section so we can keep examining ancient mysteries without flattening them into a single answer. Where the astronomy theory breaks. One of the strongest pieces of evidence against a universal astronomical plan is superimposition. Lines and shapes cross one another. New features were built over older ones. If the Pampa had been designed as a precise, integrated instrument, repeatedly obscuring earlier components would be difficult to explain. But if different groups returned over generations, creating and renewing ceremonial routes, crossing older marks becomes understandable. Another problem is viewpoint. Astronomical interpretations often treat lines as arrows pointing toward a horizon event. Yet many lines connect to centers, plazas, mounds, or other lines in ways that suggest movement rather than observation. Some broad trapezoids appear suitable for groups. Some narrow paths show evidence consistent with walking. The route may have mattered more than the distant endpoint. In one carefully studied area, Ruggles and Nicholas Saunders reconstructed the sequence of intersecting lines and found what they described as a desert labyrinth. From above, the pattern looked confusing. On the ground, when the chronological relationships were considered, it formed a complex itinerary. The point was not to see a picture. The point was to travel through a controlled sequence of turns and passages. That discovery offers a useful warning. Modern viewers naturally privilege the aerial image because aircraft and satellite photographs reveal dramatic shapes. Ancient users experienced dust, heat, horizon, effort, sound, and the presence of other people. A line can guide a procession. A cleared space can hold a gathering. A route can separate participants, bring them together, or lead them toward a place where offerings are made. 4. Archaeological surveys have found ceramics and other materials on the Pampa. Their exact meaning varies. Plain vessels may have carried water for workers. Broken decorated pottery may reflect ritual, deposition, or later activity. The evidence does not allow every fragment to be treated as an offering, but it confirms human use beyond the initial act of construction. This ground-level perspective also explains why enormous figures could matter even if no participant saw the whole form. The image could belong to collective knowledge. Builders knew what they were making. Priests or community leaders may have controlled the design. Participants could walk a section, approach a figure, or gather beside it. Its full shape could exist in memory, tradition, or a smaller model. In ritual, complete visibility is not required. Meaning can be produced through participation. The paths people actually walked. The idea of Nazca as a walking landscape has grown stronger with modern mapping. Researchers have identified formal straight lines and trapezoids, but also winding trails that cross the desert. These different route systems are associated with different kinds of figurative geoglyphs. The distinction became much clearer in a 2024 study led by Masato Sakai of Yamagata University with IBM researchers. An artificial intelligence system analyzed high-resolution imagery and identified promising locations for field inspection. Archaeologists then walked the terrain and confirmed 303 previously undocumented figurative geoglyphs in 6 months. The work nearly doubled the known number of figurative geoglyphs in the study area. The discovery was important not only because of the number. The new data revealed patterns. Large line type figures, often depicting wild animals, tended to lie near the formal network of straight lines and trapezoids. Smaller relief-type figures, often showing humanoids, domesticated camelids, human heads, or scenes involving people and animals, were usually located close to informal winding trails. Their average distance from the nearest trail was only a few dozen meters. That distribution suggests two different social experiences. The giant line-type figures may have been associated with community-level ceremonial activity within the formal geoglyph network. The smaller relief figures may have functioned at the scale of individuals or small groups moving along trails. The researchers compared them to information displays, although the exact messages remain uncertain. This is a major change in the central question. Earlier theories asked why the Nazca made pictures visible from the air. The newer evidence asks what travelers saw while walking. A small figure 3 to 7 meters across does not need an aerial audience. It can be placed beside a path, encountered at close range, and understood as part of a sequence. The motifs also complicate the romantic image of Nazca as a peaceful gallery of animals. Some figures show decapitated heads, a theme also present in Nazca ceramics and ritual material. Others show domesticated animals or human actions. These were not random doodles. They belonged to a visual language involving social identity, ritual power, death, fertility, animals, and the relationship between communities and their environment. The desert was therefore both monumental and intimate. It held giant figures connected to public ceremonial networks and smaller images placed for people on foot. The lines were not one message. They were a medium. 5. Water, mountains, and ritual. Any explanation of Nazca must confront water. The south coast is extraordinarily dry, but the communities who created the geoglyphs depended on agriculture. Rivers were seasonal and rainfall indistant. Highlands affected life in the valleys. Water was not simply an economic resource. Across the Andes, mountains, springs, rivers, fertility, and ancestors were woven into sacred geography. Johann Reinhard argued that many lines and geometric areas were connected with rituals directed toward water sources, mountains, and agricultural fertility. In this interpretation, straight lines were not necessarily pointers to stars. They could be sacred paths used in ceremonies. Large trapezoids and cleared areas could be places where groups performed rites intended to secure rain, water, and productive land. Aveni reached related conclusions from mapping and comparison. Many line centers and directions could be understood in relation to terrain and water flow rather than astronomy. He also compared the radial organization of some Nazca Lines with later Andean Sikh systems, in which sacred places and social groups were organized through lines extending from a center. The comparison does not prove that Nazca used the same institution, but it shows that radial sacred geography has a strong Andean context. The water interpretation is persuasive because it connects the pampa to the actual risks of life in the region. It also fits the ceremonial role of Kawachi and the movement of groups across the landscape. But it should not be exaggerated. The lines were not an underground hydraulic map, and there is no evidence that every geoglyph points to a hidden water source. Some proposed correlations are selective or difficult to test. A more defensible conclusion is that water and fertility were likely major themes within a broader ritual system. Animals depicted on the pampa may have carried associations with ecological zones, rain, the sea, mountains, or supernatural power. Killer whales, birds, monkeys, spiders, and plants connected the desert to distant environments through trade, pilgrimage, myth, and imagination. The figures brought a larger world onto the dry plain. Ritual also helps explain why the construction process mattered. Clearing stones, maintaining routes, carrying vessels, gathering at line centers, and walking prescribed paths could turn labor into ceremony. The landscape became sacred not only because of what it represented, but because of what people repeatedly did there. The new geoglyphs that changed the question. The 303 geoglyphs confirmed through AI-assisted survey demonstrate that Nazca is not a closed catalog. Hundreds of likely candidates remain to be investigated. Remote sensing, drones, LiDAR, field survey, and improved dating methods are changing the scale at which archaeologists can study the region. New technology does not solve the mystery automatically. An algorithm can detect faint patterns, but it cannot decide their cultural meaning without archaeological context. Field teams still have to confirm whether a feature is human-made, record its construction, examine nearby trails and artifacts, and compare it with known styles. The strongest results come from combining machine detection with work on the ground. The expanded inventory reveals that the famous hummingbird, monkey, and spider are not representative of the entire corpus. Popular culture selected the most elegant aerial figures and treated them as the mystery. The smaller relief figures show a different Nazca: human bodies, camelids, severed heads, interactions, and rougher forms intended for close viewing. They suggest that the desert was used to communicate social and ritual information at several scales. 6. The new research also reinforces chronology and diversity. Relief-type figures and line-type figures differ in technique, size, motif, and relationship to routes. This supports the idea that geoglyph making evolved rather than emerging as a complete master plan. Different communities may have used the pampa to express identity, mark routes, stage ceremonies, invoke supernatural forces, and connect local groups to wider pilgrimage networks. There is still room for disagreement. The word billboard, used to describe some trailside figures, is a modern analogy, not a translation of Nazca thought. We do not know precisely what a decapitated head signified in every context. We cannot confidently assign each line to a named community or ritual. The people who made the geoglyphs left no readable written explanation. But absence of writing does not mean absence of evidence. Spatial pattern is evidence. Superimposition is evidence. Motifs are evidence. Associated artifacts are evidence. The relationship between trails and figures is evidence. Together, they do not reveal a single sentence from the past. They reveal how the landscape was organized and experienced. What the desert can and cannot tell us. What, then, were the Nazca Lines? They were art, but not art separated from life. Their motifs belong to the visual culture of Paracas and Nazca communities, enlarged into hillsides and plains. They were astronomical in a limited sense, because some alignments and ceremonies may have related to the sun, seasons, or stars. But the evidence does not support one enormous calendar controlling the whole pampa. They were pathways and spaces for movement. Ground studies, line forms, labyrinthine routes, and associations with formal networks support processions and ceremonial walking. They were connected with public gathering and pilgrimage, especially within the wider sacred landscape that included Kawachi. They were likely tied to water, fertility, mountains, and the uncertainty of farming in an extreme environment. Yet they were not simply a practical water map. Their purpose was symbolic, social, and ritual, as much as environmental. And they were not all the same. The strongest modern evidence points to multiple functions. Large line type animal figures near formal lines may have belonged to community ceremonies. Smaller relief figures beside trails may have addressed travelers or small groups. Earlier hillside figures and later pampa designs emerged from different historical moments. Overlapping lines show that meaning was renewed, altered, or replaced. The mystery survives because archaeology can reconstruct behavior more easily than belief. We can identify where people walked, what they built, what images they repeated, and how designs relate to one another. We cannot hear the songs performed on the pampa. We do not know the names of the beings represented. We cannot recover every rule governing who entered a trapezoid, who carried offerings, or who controlled the design. The most realistic conclusion is not that one theory defeated all others. It is that the original question was too narrow. Nazca was not a single puzzle created to hide one answer. It was a long-lived ritual landscape. Part image, part road, part stage, part memory, and part negotiation with forces that sustained life. In June 1941, Cossack looked toward the setting sun and saw a calendar. He was probably seeing one meaningful relationship inside a much larger system. The line beneath his feet may have marked a date, guided a procession, connected a community to a sacred place, or carried several meanings at once. 7. The desert has preserved the marks, but not the instructions. As new geoglyphs continue to appear beside ancient trails, the most important unresolved question is no longer who could see them from the sky. It is this: when a traveler encountered one of these images on foot 2,000 years ago, what were they expected to remember, fear, or do next?